Hi, my name is Matthew Slowe from the University of Kent. I'm going to be talking to you about how we've been through the upgrade process from Live at Edu to Office 365 and how we've gone down the Shibboleth rather than ADFS route. Just to give you a bit of context, our previous Live at Edu service we launched back in 2009. It's got about 62,000 mailboxes in, which about 22,000 are listed as active. All the account management was done via our local legacy homebrew identity management service, which then made calls out to PowerShell via a bridge that we wrote. That does all the sort of the synchronous side of the account management, and then we have an ILM instance that comes in and synchronizes things like the first name, surname, display name, things like that. Password synchronization is done from our on-site Active Directory out to Live at Edu via ILM and password change notification service, which sits on the DCs and monitors for passwords coming in, and it replicates them. So we learnt about the upgrade to Office 365 last summer sometime. We started having a play with it in September, had a test domain, had a mess around, didn't really do much with it. In December, Microsoft circulated a load of requests saying, we want you to upgrade, we're willing to offer some funding to sort of be an early adopter. We took them up on that with a view to upgrading in March of this year. So just after Christmas we started actually properly looking at how this upgrade process was going to work, how all the authentication was going to work. We engaged the Oxford Computer Group to help us with the upgrade process, so we had a couple of days with them in January and then some time later on to set some extra stuff up. During our time with them, it became apparent that although the service was being upgraded, the only thing that was actually happening was the identities were being moved from the Live at Edu infrastructure onto the Office 365 infrastructure. The actual back-end mailboxes don't move. Unfortunately, though, once you've moved, PCNS doesn't work. So there's no support for that. You have to federate in order to get that same level of user experience, having passwords the same on and off-site. Another thing we discovered while we were talking to OCG is that your UPN in your Active Directory and the UPN up in your Office 365 instance have to match. This may be okay for you. It's not okay for us. We've got users splattered across two separate Live ID namespaces for reasons I'm not going to go into now, but that's the way it is. And on site, our Active Directory UPN is set to their username at kent.ac.uk, and that's because we need our eduroam infrastructure for that to be correct because of some restrictions that the MPS software puts on it. We don't know very much about how our local ILM instance worked. It was set up by OCG again a few years ago. We haven't really had to touch it, it just works. And we have no experience at all of ADFS. So we decided, based on all of those, that Shibboleth was probably the way to go. We had a lot more experience with it. We could do the manipulation for the UPNs and effectively fake them in a way that ADFS couldn't. So we decided to go down that route. After we'd gone down that route, it transpired that because we've got two domains, each of those domains is set up separately for the federation, and you can't duplicate an entity ID between two different domain setups. So we have to have two separate Shibboleth IDPs in order to cope with our two Office 365 domains. Also during testing, we discovered that in order to use ECP, which is the sort of the backdoor mechanism for the rich clients to be able to provide authentication, so that's things like IMAP, ActiveSync for mobile devices and stuff. For that to work, the certificate that you expose on your HTTPS endpoint has to be one that a browser would trust. Initially, when I was playing with this, I had self-signed certificates on there, the same certificate that I was using for the Federation Trust Fabric, and it just didn't work. No diagnostics at all, just an error back to the user saying you couldn't log in. It transpired that you have to have a proper certificate, otherwise the infrastructure at the other end just ignores it. Once we got all that working, we discovered that the Azure metadata that the documentation tells you that you should configure your Shibboleth IDP to download every day is missing the binding for ECP to work. Web single sign-on works fine, but it's missing this one line. The documentation itself has a copy of the metadata in it, and that's correct. So we've cut and pasted that out into a file on our IDPs. Yeah, issues with there. As far as diagnosing errors, the web-based side of stuff, although all the user sees is user couldn't sign in, if you actually look inside the HTML source for that error page, you can there's an error code that you can go and map against a various list of errors. It's all documented in that knowledge base article there. As for ECP, it either works or it doesn't. It's a very opaque. In order to make sure that our end of stuff was working properly, I went through and sort of wrote up a way to test it using curl and writing an XML SAML assertion, and that's all documented in that blog post. Yell if you need a hand with that. As for logging support tickets, it can be pretty tricky to get Frontline to agree that ADFS isn't the only way to federate, and there's this thing called Shibboleth and SAML. It was tricky from time to time, and once it got escalated, the support was very good, but getting the thing escalated to someone who knew about Shibboleth proved tricksy at times. As for actually running our production IDPs, there's a Microsoft white paper on how to set them up. It's a bit Windows-centric in that it's all about how to set up Tomcat and Shibboleth and stuff on Windows. We're doing it on RHEL. Doesn't really matter, you just change the paths. Largely, we didn't really know how much load we were going to have after it had all kicked off. All the authentication was hidden from us up in the cloud in Live Edu. So we sort of guessed and said, well, okay, so we'll set up two, we'll load balance them, and we'll set them up in such a way that dropping extra ones alongside is reasonably easy. That's what we've done. We've got two RHEL virtual machines on VMware, each with Apache fronting it, doing the SSL termination and authentication layer, and then Tomcat actually doing the hard work. Two instances of Shibboleth IDP on each load balanced VM, one for each of our domains, and they're on different URL endpoints. There. For web single sign-on, we're using ModMelon to tie the web experience into our existing simple SAML on-site infrastructure. So users see the same login screen that they would do for all of our other web services, and they get that single sign-on element as well. The HTTPS, I should say, basic auth element is for ECP. So ECP comes in and it makes a basic auth request using the username and password supplied to it by the client. That looks them up in LDAP, does the right thing, still in Apache, and then passes that all back into Tomcat with remote user set for it to do the assertion processing. Another thing we discovered while I was debugging stuff was that the web-based single sign-on uses the post profile rather than the redirect profile, which most of the other SPs around the Access Management Federation at least use. This was a bit of a problem because when we initially set it up, we were using a modauth mem cookie to do that front-end authentication catch, and that doesn't support post-preservation. So the user would log in. The first time they would log in, they'd get redirected off, come back, and it would all break. The next time they went around the loop, it would be fine. It took a bit of poking to figure out what was going on. Not something I'd really come across before. So we swapped out modauth mem cookie, and we're now using ModMelon, which does support post-preservation, and it all works great. So once you've got past Apache, you're talking to one of the two IDPs, and they look you up in LDAP to get your cloud user principal name and your Active Directory to get their object GUID out of there, and it turns that into what Office 365 calls an immutable ID and constructs a SAML assertion and sends them back, and that's all working great. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide. That was the basic process of how we went around the upgrade process. Of particular note is the dir sync ID export and reload. dir sync ID is what's used for ILM to link the users from on-site to off-site. That's not migrated as part of the upgrade, so we had to export all of those, and then after the upgrade had finished we had to re-import them all. The export took probably about half an hour, the import took 12 hours. There may be a better way to do it. This is the way I did it. I've got PowerShell for doing that. If you want it, drop me an email. After that all works, you need to turn on Federation, which then instructs Office 365 to send the users back to us to do the authentication. That is 2 commands. Actually running those is very easy. It takes about, well, for us, it took about half an hour for all those changes to propagate around all the web infrastructure. In that time there were some very odd things happening in terms of user experience for people trying to log on. After it had all finished, the users who had a cookie for Outlook.com, sometimes if they were going the wrong way into the system, got presented with a box saying, oh, do you want to log in? This is who I remembered you were. Except it got it wrong and tried to log them in with their live ID rather than their new Office 365 ID. It's caused quite a few support calls. The fix is either to click the link underneath which says sign in with a different account and go through the whole process again, or to get the user to clear all the cookies out for, well, as much as you can really, and then it works. Another bit of a revelation for us was that once you've done your initial FIM sync, all the users that are claimed by that synchronization process, you can't touch with the set PowerShell commandlets, which is what we were relying on to do all our account management back in Live at Edu. So we've had to go through quite a rapid redesign of how our account management is going to work on Office 365 to flow everything up through FIM rather than the out-of-band sort of PowerShell, effectively manual account management. It just doesn't let you do it. As for how much load we're getting, our 2 IDPs are largely coping pretty well. We see the occasional spike at random times in the day where we get a hajillion accesses from Microsoft come in, but largely that's what it boils down to. We get about probably 500,000 authentications per day aggregated across the 2 separate IDP flavors and the 2 VMs that are running it. Largely ECP, so that's probably mobile devices coming in all the time and chattering away. And the actual web single sign-on is quite a small proportion of that. Over to you really for questions. I'm going to be on the phone hopefully to answer questions, otherwise David's going to be there. You might want to look up the Microsoft Identity Gistmail list we created probably about 6 months ago for talking about VIM issues, Office 365, that sort of thing. There's my email address, and all the links that I've referred to in the presentation are on my blog, our blog here, and there's a short link to that there should you want it. So hopefully I'll be on the phone and I'll be talking to you in a minute.